In this video, we're going to discuss how this $85 scoop that I bought off of eBay helped lower my EGTs by 100 degrees. So on my RV, I pay a lot of attention to EGTs. This is a Caterpillar 3126B engine. It makes 330 horsepower, and it's pushing a 40-foot bus that's usually towing a car behind it. And the engine works really pretty hard going down the highway. I drive this faster than a lot of people drive their Class A's. And so I want to do everything I can to help make the engine last longer. The last thing that I want to do is have to pull ahead or replace the engine or anything like that. And so one of the things I've been attacking over the time that I've owned the RV is trying to help keep the EGTs lower. And I was noticing when I was driving this, first off, that the EGTs were generally higher than I would like, and I've done a lot of things to address that. But one of the big things that I noticed was that when I was driving in crosswinds, where the crosswind was coming from the passenger side, especially the front passenger side, keep in mind this turbo inlet is on the driver's side, that my EGTs were noticeably higher. And if I had winds coming from the driver's side in a crosswind, my EGTs were significantly lower. So why would that be? The answer is a little bit more apparent when you open things up. So I can't remove the turbo scoop easily after installing it, but the stock setup on the RV is simply this grate right here that is on the side of this bay door to access a couple of things like the air dryer, water separator, things like that. If you take a look in here, you can kind of see what this looks like. So this is really a very bad setup. When you have a grate like that that's against the side of a flat surface, you're essentially going to have a Bernoulli effect, so that even if you have zero wind, the turbo is going to have to work to pull air in. It's going to create a low pressure area in front of that grate. So even in a no wind condition, this is suboptimal, and you're going to end up having to make the turbo work harder. Now when the turbo is working harder, then that means that it's going to have to spin faster to get the same amount of airflow, get the same boost reading in the manifold. And when you need to make the turbo spin faster, that's going to take a higher amount of pressure in the exhaust. And so ideal gas law, PV equals nRT, your pressure goes up, your temperature is going to go up as well. And you can observe this a lot of ways. If you have an RV that has, or any kind of 3126 or engine that has a butterfly valve for an exhaust brake on it, you can see that when you turn it on, your EGTs are going to go up even though you have no fuel flow. I notice that if I'm just coasting, my EGTs are somewhere in, say, the 400 range, and when I hit the exhaust brake and that butterfly valve closes, I can see as high as around 800 degrees just from that pressure that goes up in the exhaust manifold. So anything you can do to make your turbo not have to work as hard is only going to help you in terms of longevity, and it'll also help your turbo lag to some extent. Alright, so I thought this might be a little bit easier to explain with a diagram to show what's happening. So here I've got the RV, we'll say that this is forward, and here's the air inlet. So if you've got a crosswind that's coming from the driver's side, then this makes a lot of sense. This is essentially providing some kind of ram air effect almost. But if you've got air that's coming from this direction, it's going to go under the bus or over the bus, and it's trying to go this way. And therefore, your turbo is having to try to pull this air, make it come in like this. But if we draw the front here, what's actually happening also is that this air is coming over here, and then the bus is ending, and so you're creating a low pressure area over here. So that means that the turbo is having to work even harder to try to pull this air in and get it into the engine. But even if there's a no wind condition, it's not great either, because the wind is coming along like this, and this creates a low pressure area right here at the air inlet. So the turbo is going to have to work somehow, no matter what you do. But remember, also, we've got forward motion that we're dealing with. So if you put a scoop in, regardless of which direction the wind is coming from, since we're not in a static position and we're moving forward, there's going to be some amount of airflow that's coming this direction, and this scoop then takes it and puts it into the turbo. When you look at the actual pressure from a ram air effect, it's really not that high. We're not getting a significant improvement from that ram air effect. What we're really doing is we're getting an improvement from getting rid of these other effects that are hurting the situation and making the turbo work harder. And that's where we're seeing the improvement. If you try to look at this and say, well, the ram air effect even at 75 miles an hour is only 0.1 psi, that's not enough to make a difference. You're right, it's not, at least not a very big one. But these other effects that we're dealing with, those end up actually making a difference. And so by eliminating those effects, that's where we're seeing this improvement coming from. So now let me show you a little bit from the Berg Matchbot to help illustrate why this is.
I'll put a link to this in the description. If you have never used this before, it's a really neat tool that lets you explore different possibilities with different Berg turbochargers, and it was part of how I determined which turbo I wanted to put on my 3126. Up here, you've got a bunch of different inputs, and you can put 6 points in at any given time. You can vary RPM, volumetric efficiency, boost, and then you have a bunch of other factors like intercooler effectiveness, pressure drop, air filter restriction, things like that. You can put in your engine size here. You have different options for single or twin turbo, ambient air, altitude, and it has different fuel types, so you don't have to just use this on a diesel application. And with the outputs, it then can tell you a whole lot about what's going on with the turbo, and this can be a bit of an eye chart and take a while to look at, but you can get some really interesting things out of it. It'll even show you the compressor maps for the different turbos. This happens to be the one that I put on my RV. And then you can use it to help size your exhaust housing as well. So really powerful tool. What I'm doing with it here for our purposes is I've created 6 points, and if you look carefully, you'll see that 1 and 2 are the same, 3 and 4 are the same, and 5 and 6 are the same. And the only difference that between them is the air filter restriction, and 1 point for each of these has 0 psi, the other point has 1 psi. And if you come down and you take a look at what that 1 psi difference does, and 1 psi is a lot, as I said before, ram air effect at highway speed is still only going to be about 0.1 psi, but we're dealing with additional effects that are going on here. You can see that air filter restriction, as we are allocating it for this, is increasing your pressure ratio, which is going to also increase your compressor outlet temperature. And one big thing down here that I like that they put in here is the turbo shaft power. And notice this goes up from 82 to 87 horsepower. So one comment to make is that a lot of people talk about turbochargers as free horsepower, and that's really not entirely true. It is an efficient way to make more horsepower, but you are still taking horsepower to spin the turbocharger. And in this case, this 1 horsepower, this 1 psi air filter restriction is causing about a 6% increase in the horsepower required to spin the turbo. Well, if you take a look at the EGTs that I saw, going from, say, 1400 in some cases, which is really a lot hotter than what you want to see, down to 1300, convert that to Rankine because you need to be in absolute temperature and do a ratio there, it comes out to pretty close to 6% as well. So you can see here that you don't want a clogged air filter, and you don't want things that are going to hurt the restriction on the inlet side of the turbo. What a lot of people say about it doesn't matter because it's a turbo, it'll just make up for it. That's halfway true, it might, but it will also hurt you overall.
I wanted to add a scoop like I did to your RV. There's really not a prescribed way to do this, but this is really pretty simple. What I did was I took dimensions of the square grate that existed, And then I basically just looked through Amazon and eBay until I found a scoop that was going to match the area as best as possible. I did try to make sure that the overall area of this opening was pretty close to the area of the grate. It's still a little bit off, but it's close enough. And then all I had to do to attach it was I simply drilled holes and put screws with washers and lock nuts on either side. I did add some silicone around the edges to help seal it well. So overall effects that I noticed after I installed this. The first thing was that the crosswind effect that I was noticing before was completely gone. My EGTs overall were lower, and this was especially under a transient condition like when I was accelerating. You have to have some amount of airspeed to force the air through to have any kind of an effect with it. But it doesn't really take all that much speed moving forward to make this help enough to help offset the kind of turbulent effects that you would have. So overall, I think that this was a really cheap, easy, and worthwhile modification. This is probably one of the easiest and cheapest ones that I've done to the RV with the most effect. Lowering EGTs by 100 degrees or more with an $85 part is just an obvious win in my book. And pretty much no matter where the air inlet is to your engine on your RV, you're going to be able to find a place that you can put something like this. And there are so many different fiberglass scoops out there that you can find one that's going to be able to fit. And it probably won't cost you that much money if you do a search. Like I said, this was about 85 bucks off of eBay. So I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Leave any questions below, and thanks for watching.